Welcome to the Point of No Return podcast, a show at the intersection of technology and strategy. On this show, we interview industry leaders and experts to better understand how they think about strategy during this time of exponential progress.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the Point of No Return podcast. On today's show, I spoke with Jordan Lebel, Associate Professor at the John Molson School of Business. Jordan is a special figure in my life. He was a teacher when I was in university. He was one of the people responsible for me kind of following the career path that I did. So I'm super happy that I had the chance to chat with him. A little bit on his bio, Jordan has this really stellar career so far. He received his MSc from Cornell University, then his PhD from McGill, and then joined Concordia in 2000. He used to head the Executive MBA program as well as the Beauregard Center of Excellence in Communications Research. He developed many successful and award-winning courses, including the MBA elective called Experience Marketing and the online course Marketing Yourself, taken by over 20,000 students between 2004 and 2017, which was pretty revolutionary at the time. He's the recipient of the 2005 and 2010 Best Teacher Award at JMSB, the 2011 President's Excellence in Teaching, and the 3M National Teaching Fellowship. We had a very interesting and eclectic conversation. We spoke about his background, how he got into teaching, his passion for helping students grow, the dichotomy between teaching and research, and then we spoke a lot about technology, funny enough, about the intersection of food and technology and what the university of the future will look like. I owe a lot to Jordan. I'm super grateful that he took the time. It was a really good conversation about the future of education, and that I think that you'll enjoy the show. Jordan, thanks for being on the show.
My pleasure.
So it's a real pleasure to have you on the show. From having gone from being one of your students to now being able to interview you, I have to say it's quite an honor. So yeah, I appreciate your time.
My pleasure, totally. I look forward to this.
I guess the first question I've never really asked you is, what led you to a career of teaching?
Oh boy, that's if you had told me 30 years ago I'd one day have a PhD and be teaching and be doing what I now do, I think I would have died of laughter or something like that. It was too awkward. But I started out in the restaurant business. I have my first degree from the hotel school here in Montreal, and I really wanted to be a restaurant industry person. And somewhere along the line, I went to Cornell, the hotel school there, did my bachelor, my master's. And when I finished my master's, the kind of job offers I was getting was a downturn in the restaurant, global restaurant and hotel industry at that time. And I wasn't getting the kind of offer that made me want to join the rat race, so to speak. I mean, the offers I was getting were from LA, Chicago, but I wasn't passionate about them. And all of a sudden, out of the blue, this gentleman shows up, was the dean of a hotel school in Norway, of all places. And he just seduced me. I mean, he just said, if you join us, we'll give you whatever you need. We'll give you carte blanche to do the kind of courses that you want to do and whatnot. And come on, I was 24 years old at the time. I was 23 with my master's from Cornell. I thought, where else am I going to get this chance to travel, go to the polar circle? And, so I jumped on the plane. I had a couple other job offers, one in Switzerland, but I ended up in Norway. And the day I visited Norway, it sort of all came together. I mean, it was, of course it was like 24-hour daylight. It was sort of magical in a way. Little prepared me for, the 24 hours of darkness that were to come 6 months later. But I ended up in the classroom there. That was one of my first taste of it. I had been a teaching assistant at Cornell, but it made me realize that I like engineering the conditions, the circumstances that help people grow. And one way to do that is in the classroom. There's other ways, of course, but the classroom was a nice element for me, particularly because, like I said, those first experiences I had in Norway, I had a lot of flexibility. And I'm a bit of an intrapreneur, a very creative type of person. And not that most academics are not. I'm not trying to suggest that. But as an academic, I have a lot of energy and a lot of creativity that I like to put to good use. And so for me, that milieu, and I guess I was very lucky to stumble upon a school that gave me that flexibility. It was just sort of a revelation for me. This is where I belong. And so I was in Norway for 3 years. I came back to work. I spent a year after that in France, and then eventually made my way to McGill to do my PhD at the business school there, with a person that I had known for many years, and I managed to convince to let me do my PhD on food marketing, or some issues of related to food marketing, and that's when I decided to focus on chocolate. So sort of a long way, sort of a roundabout way of ending up where I am, sort of taking the more academic / research type of route.
And what do you think makes the trait of a successful professor? Right?
Oh boy, lots of research on that. Lots of people asking this question. I can tell you what I think students appreciate about me, and how I came to win some teaching awards in the past. I like to give a voice to students. I'm not one of those professors. Like, there used to be a time, and I guess I had some of those professors who adopted the mental posture where, well, I know and you don't, and I'm going to show you, or I'm going to teach you. My approach is, well, students often know more than I do, or they know other things than I do. So I try to create a classroom where there's a sense of sharing. There's a safe space where we can all explore, fill in our lack of knowledge, leverage each other's knowledge. So I invite a lot of classroom discussion and exchanges. I'm also very, humble and open. Sometimes I'll bring in experiences that I had as a consumer, as a foodie, and I'll share that with the classroom. And then students like, they typically say, "Oh, you have similar experiences to us. You just come at it from a different angle." So then we'll talk about that. So I think the hallmark of a good professor today is someone who's more of a coach, more of a accompagnateur in French, that sort of guides you and put up the signposts or the parameters so that you can evolve and grow. Students have access to so much knowledge right now. I mean, years ago, I was flabbergasted. I was teaching this MBA class, and this student shows up and he said, Sir, I just saw this video from this Harvard professor. And of course, interiorly, my mind goes, oh crap, I hope it's not something that, is out of left field and I have no knowledge about. It just so happens this was someone I knew at Harvard. I knew his material. Says, oh yeah, great stuff, Following week, the student comes up and he had looked at another video from some professor from Stanford. And I'm like, okay, this has got to stop because there's no way I can keep up with this. Which, to my point is, there's just so much material out there that as a prof, you're more like, okay, let me help you navigate that. Let me help you connect the dots and try to see how that helps you in furthering your career, or at least preparing yourself for the day when you graduate and you need that confidence to approach future employers and whatnot. So that's how I see more my role. And I think the other thing that's very important to me, I update 50 to 60% of my lectures and material every year. Even this semester, I'm teaching food marketing, and I've just revamped entire lectures. The world moves at such a fast pace, so I see also my role as zeroing in on the thing I think will be hot in 4 or 5 years from now. So years ago, I started talking about intelligent packaging, open innovation, synthetic meats. And of course, sometimes it helps that some of my own PhD or master's students are working on some of these things, so I can feed off of that. But I also see my role as a prof to try to bring students where they didn't think of going themselves, perhaps, to say, well, look at this, put that on your radar screen and see where that takes you in a couple of years. You might find that useful. So I like to sort of broaden their horizons in that way.
I feel that you mentioned an interesting point about how you help your students grow and think differently, and I could definitely attest to that. So thank you. But I feel there's another component of the research piece, right? It's almost like having two jobs, right? Like you have to coach and guide your students, but you also have to do proprietary research at the same time, which I feel like is two different jobs, right? Like it'd be two separate people doing this. How do you, what's the relationship between those two?
I'm so happy you brought that up. I wouldn't have thought of bringing it up myself, but I think it's true. And a lot of people don't realize that the university professor, if you really get invested in your job, you wear many hats at once. On the one end, you're a teacher by day, but then the rest of the time you might be doing research. There certainly is a very, very strong expectation that you carry your weight research-wise. There's different types of appointments in a university. university. If you're a tenure track professor or you're tenures because you are doing research, so you're perhaps not teaching as much as somebody who may not be doing research. For my part, I have a teaching load, but I also publish and do some research. I supervise master's and PhD student. And that's a whole different piece. Universities are more and more investing in research. They're all more and more the recipient of research funds, either from public taxes or some other, granting agency. There's many of them. But there's a strong expectation that you will contribute to research creation and research itself. A portion of that piece is supervising PhD and master's students, which I absolutely love doing. I love seeing the evolution of someone over 4 or 5 years, and then, they graduate, they get a job, and then they start supervising other students. So there's something immensely rewarding about that. I enjoy the research piece, but I come at it from a slightly different angle, because I grew up in the, industry, in the food and restaurant industry. I tend to look at research as an applied endeavor. I like to start with questions that matter to managers out there, to people who are out in the field. That's why I spend quite a bit of time consulting, connecting with industry people and listening to them, getting them to talk about their challenges and the things they've tried and that worked or didn't work. And very often therein, it will give me sort of some idea for a research project or some question to explore.
What's the lens then? Because it sounds very interesting in terms of how you approach it. And like you said, you wear many different hats. What's the lens or the grid that you use to say, okay, this is something interesting, like at the intersection, I guess, of multiple disciplines? How do you then make a call?
Well, there's two things. First of all, I'm a marketing prof, but I think one of my strengths is I can tango with people from other disciplines. That's something I've always done. Now, when you do that, you have to take the time to learn the language, the discipline of someone else. So if I work with somebody in design, for example, it'll take 3, 4, 5 months to get to know each other. I work with a colleague in design, and for years we kept using the same word until we realized we both meant something different because in our own respective disciplines, it meant something different. So you have to have that patience. And then once you start doing that, you start developing a sense for what are the important questions, I think it helps to have a very broad radar screen to look at things of, and nowadays with technology, you can program, you can get a bunch of stuff in your inbox every morning to sort of keep your eyes out for different domains, different sectors. I love doing that. And then that gives you a sense of what's going to be hot, what's going to be interesting, particularly if you're able to keep a foot in the research world, and definitely having a university posting, I get access to one of the best library system around. Concordia really is fantastic for that. And then keeping a foot in practice by connecting with practitioners. I give conferences. I connect with people. I'm very involved in the food industry in Quebec. And then just those kinds of connections help you develop a sense for what are some of the important questions right now.
Okay. There's so much to unpack in what you said. I'll focus in on one aspect that you spoke about is about technology, and maybe talk a little bit about Concordia,
Sure.
where we met and where I was a student with you. So it's 2003. You and Professor Simpkins come up with this idea for marketing yourself, right?
Yep.
Which I thought back then was like, oh, okay, online course, whatever. I'm like, kind of like this ignoramus student. But reflecting
an easy A, right?
Yeah. Reflecting back on it today, it's like holy crap! This pretty innovative for its time, right? Early 2000s. So I want to kind of like talk about the inception of that and how it's led to your work in that field.
Well, this was, you thank your lucky stars sometimes when planets align and you're given an opportunity to do something like marketing yourself. For us, it started in late 2002, and the dean at the time said, our school should really be looking at this nascent field of online courses. And I've always been I wouldn't call myself a techie or a techno geek. I mean, I just like reading about new things and asking myself, well, okay, how can that impact my world, or how might that impact the food and food service world that I'm more involved in? And so when the dean left the room, my colleague Harold Simpkins and I looked at each other and said, well, this is kind of interesting. Why don't we put our heads together and come up with maybe something to test the waters, right? And the realization came when he and I started talking about career choices. And in his case, he had gotten a bachelor in industrial labor relations, was convinced that this is what he wanted to do, got out, and within a couple of weeks on the job realized, crap, this is not what I want to do. In my case, I always knew that food was my thing. I was, from the age of 10, I think, partly out of necessity. I grew up on a farm with parents who were working in the city, so sometimes I was left to fend by myself. And so necessity was the mother of invention there, and it made me into a bit of a foodie. But even though food was always a constant in my life, making career decisions were no less difficult because I was often confronted with many competing opportunities at the same time. So how do you make career decisions in such a context? So both Harold and I came at this from different angles, and we thought, gee, wouldn't it be nice to give students the tools and the opportunity to spend some time thinking about some of these issues so that by the time they graduate, they have a bit of a sense of where they want to take their career. They have a bit more confidence in approaching employers, meaning that they're ready to talk about their strengths. They're ready to talk about their unique value proposition, right? What do they have to offer? And I think Concordia was the place to do it. I can't think of another university that would have had the blend of courage and innovativeness to allow profs to develop a 3-credit course to give students a chance to think about life after a degree, which is essentially what we were doing, right? And so we created the course. We beta tested it in 2003. It was delivered in partnership with Concordia. So we provided the IP. They created the sort of a interface. And the course was running for 14 years. And when it shut down last July, we had close to 2,000 students a year. We started by offering a reading list that was maybe too academic for our own taste. And eventually we wrote the book that went along with the course, peppered with examples from previous students who managed to market themselves and find a niche for themselves and make a name for themselves, along with some exercises and theory blended into all of that to help students advance their thinking to find, a job that they will love and that, getting out of bed in the morning and going to work won't be a drag. It'll be, a pleasure.
When was the moment you realized, we have something here, right? Like you ended up, I imagine you didn't expect to have 20,000 students over the course of, 15 years.
No.
But what was the moment you realized okay, we have something here that's really working?
We beta tested this in 2003 and we capped the course at 50 students the first summer, thinking, we'll be lucky if we get, 20, 30 students, and the course filled up right away. And we used those 50 students to sort of collect impressions and the good and bad and everything in between. And the feedback from students was so overwhelmingly positive. In spite of some of the couple of hiccups we had at the beginning, it was like, wow, this course really got me to think that I'm doing a bachelor or I'm doing a degree in economics or engineering or whatnot, but I have to think about how I'm going to monetize this. I'm going to have to think about how I'm going to turn this into a career and how to turn a career into a happy life. Because the piece or very often what we try to suggest to students is it's one thing to think about your career, but career is in everything, right? Happiness doesn't just boil down to having a good job and lots of money. If it does for you, and fine, that's great. But we invited students to come up with their own definition of success, which is something both Harold and I were very keen on. And I think it was in 2003, after the first beta test, that we started feeling that, gee, there's nothing like this out there. There's a lot of courses on resume writing and that sort of thing, but we couch resume writing into sort of a broader framework, getting students to first do a situation analysis. What's the landscape like? Who are you competing against? What's the employment situation in your domain? And then do a whole sort of marketing plan around that, culminating with a CV and cover letter that would really hook a reader or employer or recruiter in at least giving you an interview and possibly a job. Yeah. And so having been a pioneer in this field, if I may, I don't like words like pioneer, but okay, I'll take it.
How have you seen technology's impact on education? Just personally, as an aside for me, I feel that, and I hope you don't take this the wrong way, I feel that the education is lagging, and you're seeing a lot of innovation happening, but outside the walls of academia. So how do you feel that this little thing called technology has impacted education today?
So I'm with you on technology and academia, and and there's a portion of my brain that's almost tempted to go one up on you and to tell you that traditional universities that have an updated curriculum, teaching methods are just dinosaurs. I think we're fortunate at Concordia to embrace online education when we did. It was a great learning opportunity for individual professors, but for the institution as a whole as well. And granted, there's a portion of academia and education that still functions the way we functioned 500 years ago, right? Professor, traditional lectures and whatnot. But I think what's happening now, and I've been teaching for 25 plus years now, I've seen an evolution. So at first you had, technology creeping into the classroom with a lot of professors I remember when we went from acetates to PowerPoint. That was like a big thing. And a lot of professors were like, oh, I'm going to have to change everything. And so there's that innate sort of reluctance to change or opposition to change. But if you embrace it, you see where it takes you, then there's a world of opportunity. And I think academia now is sort of struggling with what place, what role, what space do we give to technology? And I'll use myself as an example. I'm one of the rare profs. I now ban cell phones and laptops in classrooms. And typically I get enormous pushback the first class or two. And I try to turn it into a game, right? I say to students, well, if I catch you staring at your crotch, because students think they can escape my gaze, they say, well, there's 60 of us. He won't see if I'm just, under the table, texting or something. I said, there's no reason you should look at your crotch and giggle, or maybe there is, but that's not my role to say, right? And so I say, well, if I catch you using your cell phone, you lose 2 points, 2 marks, or you get up and you sing a song, class will choose for you. So you hit them on their marks or you hit them on their pride, right? And at first I get a lot of pushback, right? And I did this because a couple of years ago, some students came to me and they said, well, so-and-so's on their laptop, but it's really distracting. And then they're on Facebook and, it's hard for me to concentrate. I said, okay, well, I'll try to take action. But then it became like me against Apple or Microsoft, so to speak. So I said, okay, you know what? I'm going to make a flat out decision. And very often by midterm, I have students coming to me, sir, thank you. It's so refreshing to have, 2.5 hours without those distractions. And I'm like, oh, and I get students that, well, what do you mean? Like, well, I really appreciate that I can focus and I can think about certain things and I don't have all these ping and messages, which in the scope of everything are not all that important, right? I mean, you don't need to attend to every message. So that's been the tug of war, I think, or the struggle that we've had is what use do we reserve to technology in the classroom?
Yeah, you took it in a different direction, which I find fascinating. Okay. Because, I was going to say, well, I was looking at other players in the space, which I'll get to my next question, but I completely agree with you that I think the key skill set for students, but also really for anyone in this coming century is going to be focus and being able to do deep work. Mm-hmm. And I'm a victim of this completely, right? Like
we all are. We all are.
Some of the smartest people in the world right now that work at these big tech companies, their job is to try and distract you, with this endless stream of dopamine hits, right? Yeah. I used to work at one of these companies, so I know exactly how it works. And yeah, for a student in particular, where they just, today's age, where they grew up with these tools, right? Like, back then I had a pager. So how do you concentrate? How do you get good at something? By dedicating time and effort. So I applaud you to that effort.
Mental space as well. Attentional resources.
How do you see then conversely, because like you said, these tools are not going away. You look at online platforms like Coursera or Udacity. Yep. How do you place these like massive online courses versus, traditional institutions like a university?
So a question like that, I want to come at it from two angles. So there's the angle, so the big picture, university leadership. If I'm the president of a university, so okay, what's going to be the space that we're going to reserve to things like that? And there's a couple of ways to think about it. One is a very strategic you got to remove yourself and any emotion into this. And I think the first place to start to say, okay, How can we use those platforms? How, and Harold and I have had these, I think if he'd be here, he'd agree with me because we've had these conversations many times. You take a course like Intro Marketing, which we offer 20 plus sections. Do we need to offer all of these sections in classrooms with one lecturer paid for 3 hours where students all have to come together at the same time, place, right? Or could we get away with offering maybe 10 lectures in classrooms or 10 sections in a classroom, and then the other 10 for people who may live far or who may have schedules that they can't be in class every Wednesday morning at 10 o'clock, that we offer the same course online. So that's a first level initiative. Scale it up from there. Say, well, geez, go back to my example of a student showing up to class. Say, hey, I heard Professor so-and-so from Harvard. I heard Professor so-and-so from Stanford. Why not, get the best minds? Why not get every top professors to give a master class, your best lecture? My lecture on positioning, of course I'm biased, I think is the best there is, okay? So take all the profs and say, you give us your best lecture. And you string that along into an intro marketing course, something to enthuse, something to excite, something that even a finance major or somebody who's not even in business would look at this and say, hey, this looks cool. I want to learn more about that, right? So you create an online course like that. And then instead of offering 20 sections at Concordia, 20 sections at McGill, you send all the students to that course, right? So that's another level of initiative that could be cost saving and have some significant advantages. So that's one of the first angle I would come to tackle this. The second angle I would come at is a bit more maybe philosophical, I don't know, is to step back and to think, okay, so there's this tech piece over here. How does that help us to rethink education? So is it that we are learning tech itself? And we hear a lot of students here, and by that, let me just give you a sense of what I mean. So we hear a lot of students saying, oh, we need courses on Excel. We need courses on Photoshop. So you're really learning the tech. You're learning to use those software. You're learning to, programming, or you're learning, you're learning using the tech. But there's another piece, which is using the tech to learn better, which is how do I use the tech, not so much to learn about it, but to enable my learning, to facilitate connection making. When I was a student at Cornell, I had a professor who worked on mind mapping and concept mapping, and it's a tool that's fairly popular. I can't tell you how our lives change when all of a sudden software came out to help us do our mind map. We didn't have to doodle and do it ourselves all the time. So now that tool helped us think differently. So it's, do you learn the tech? Do you learn through the tech? And to think about ways that tech is best applied in the classroom. When things like cell phones and wireless came out, everybody had to have it in class. And then say, okay, maybe we need to think about that. Maybe just making it ubiquitous is not the way to go. And I mentioned I banned cell phones in my class. I'm not the only one, by the way. There's a handful of us here that have come to this conclusion that for 2-3 hours, we'd like our students to focus, right? So I think thinking about tech and the interaction or the interplay with education, there's a number of planes or dimensions that we can think about it. And I'm not a techie, so I can't elaborate much more than that. But I get a sense that there's some thinking to be put at that end as well, beyond the strategy piece and how do we save money and how do we leverage it. I think there's sort of two levels at which we can attack this question.
Yeah, no, I completely agree.
Not sure if that was helpful.
No, very much.
I just realized I went on forever.
No, that was great. That was great. You mentioned something I find interesting is this notion of online courses where you have access to the best content in the world. What if, one model that is being experimented with is, courses at home and group work in the classroom, where it's much more similar to reality, where you work in a group environment, you're in an office or in whatever kind of job where you need to interact more with people versus like being solo and like having to like pay attention for 2 hours without doing anything.
You're entirely right. Let me just throw something else at you. I just completed an MIT Sloan online course on AI and strategy. So recently in last year, I had to take some time off, some personal time off, but I decided to make the most of it by getting a certificate in corporate governance. And it took me down a different path that I hadn't yet to explore. And so in connection with that, I've been asking myself a lot of questions about AI. Not so much about applications and whatnot, but mostly from strategy and a governance perspective. So I signed up for this course. And the great thing about this course, there was people from all over the world with all sorts of backgrounds. One was an airline senior VP, in Europe. You had all sorts of people. And then there were times during the week where they created this sort of chat room, exchange discussion board. That was just fantastic. I mean, reading, looking at how I came at the topic for the week versus how somebody else in Kenya working in a production factory came at this issue of robotization or whatever the topic was for the week, would stimulate my own things. I didn't think about this piece or this angle in education or in food or whatever. So it was just fascinating. And so I think, when smart people put their mind at creating an interface that's well thought out, then it can create magic. So in the case of MIT, and I don't want to, support MIT needlessly here, but I think they did a fairly good job at an interface that was conducive to exchange. Could it be better? Yes, I think there's a couple of opportunities to improvement here, but I think what was nice about it is giving me an opportunity to interact with people that face-to-face interaction would be impossible, right?
Yeah. And what do you think, you mentioned quite a few big changes. What do you think is a big change or trend that right now is not getting enough attention or no one's talking about?
Oh boy. Well, I'll be biased, of course. I teach food marketing here. We were the first business school in Canada to offer such a course. It's a hugely popular course because, of course, a lot of people think they're foodies and they think they want to go into it. But the one piece, and that's why I said I'm biased here, is the connection between food and tech. How tech is reshaping purchase of food, preparation of food, consumption of food, even post-consumption, like dealing with food waste. There's a bunch of applications now tackling that. I think that's a big thing. Tech in food service is very labor intense. So with labor costs going up and unemployment going down, it's really tough for restaurateurs to find solutions. Tech is starting to provide some solutions. So I think that's a whole piece that's unaddressed. And what I think is going to be important is asking ourselves, what kind of food world do we want to create? I sat on the board of a NGO a little while ago that puts gardens in schools across Quebec with sensory education workshops where we try to teach the kids, here's what a carrot looks like, and here's what you do with basil. You can make pesto and things like that, right? In a fun, kind of playful way. I shuddered what's going to happen in a world where we get our foods from Amazon and no kid has ever seen how a carrot grows because you get disconnected from your food. And people who get disconnected from your food, there's evidence that shows that there's a bunch of negative consequences that go beyond individual health. There's some research that's coming out that in areas where people get disconnected from the farm and farming practices, vocabulary shrinks. Like, who would have thought, right? I mean, there's all these connections that we don't know about that I think as we think of new tech applications, we're going to have to start attending to. We're going to have to start considering and researching. Of course, I'm preaching for my commune here. More research funds to study these things.
It's okay to have a bit of bias. I completely agree. You're obviously passionate about it, so I think it makes complete sense. To be respectful of your time, maybe just one last question about how, going back a bit more blue sky, since you've seen these big transitions, if you had to project 10 years out, what do you think the biggest changes in the classroom are going to be?
There won't be a classroom. Look, we're in a 15-story building here at John Molson School of Business. We spend millions of dollars building this building. Come here in the middle of summer, it's empty. We still function on an academic school year. Why need a big building like this? In the winter, because I teach heavily in the fall, I only come here on Fridays. Why do I have an assigned office? I mean, all these things need to be questioned. Right? And do we need classrooms? I think the whole mix has to be rethought along with some of the things we were talking about earlier, the role of a professor. I mean, the role of a professor now is more as a mentor, as an aggregator of some sort, a function that could easily be performed by AI or tech applications, right? So what is going to be the role of a professor in 10 years from now, right? In 2000, I was lucky enough to meet a wonderful gentleman at Boeing Industries, and we ended up working together for a number of years, and it gave way to a project we call 2020. And at the time, the College of Aeronautical Sciences at Embry-Riddle University had just broken ground on their new building. And the dean there said, well, we don't really know what's going to be going on in this building at the end of its useful life, but let's just project out 20 years from now. And let's try to ask ourselves, what are students going to be doing in this building? So that's why we called the project 2020, had a nice ring and a nice catch to it. They brought together a neuroscientist who used to be a cartoon animator in a previous life. They brought me in. They brought in a yoga master. I mean, we had a bunch of crazy people in that room. And for about 3 years' time, we ask in a number of workshops, what is aeronautical education going to look like in 2020? And the sort of stuff, it's like, well, do we need to stick to a 3-hour lecture format? Do we need to stick to in-class delivery? Could there be alternative models that would enhance comprehension, enhance retention, right? And I think a lot of industries, my partner is finishing a medical degree, and sometimes I shudder at the kind of training that they get that's just like memorizing. And of course, it's great if you have that kind of mind, but, maybe there's tech application and there's things that can be done in other fields, in other disciplines to, I don't want to say ease the learning process, but make it more efficient and more effective. So I don't think I've answered your question in terms of precise, but I think in 10 years from now, and maybe not in such a distant future, I think we're going to start seeing professors play a different kind of role. Technology is going to be, I hope, used better to enable learning and retention as opposed to bells and whistles and here's a few PowerPoint and let's bring in some animation and that sort of stuff. I mean, here a few years ago, the big thing was clickers. Everybody, we had to use clickers and have these quizzes where students could answer right away and we would get the answers right away. Okay, well, that lasted a couple of years and then we moved on to something else, right? So I would like to think that techno application would be a little bit more thought out to really enhance the learning experience and really help students feel that they're inching forward in a substantive way. Right before you arrive, I had a young guy here, was in my food marketing class this morning. We're chatting. He says, graduation's around the corner. I'm starting to think ahead, blah, blah, blah. He said, some of my friends are a little bit disillusioned about how they're coming at graduation. They expected more out of their training, out of their schooling. And I cringe when I hear things like that. Like, where did we go wrong? Where did we miscalculate the delivery, the content, the kinds of things that would hook young people today? Just to go back to that 2020 project I was telling you about, one of my contribution at the time, I thought this was insanely insightful. And looking back, I'm starting to question myself. But one of the things at the time, I was doing a lot of research on pleasure and consumers' relationship to pleasure. And one of the comments I made was, for students of the future, pleasure is not going to be the reward. It's not something you're going to work hard and then you want a candy. No. You're going to have a different relationship. You want education to be fun. You want the pill to go down smoothly. So I think we're going to have to rethink that reward and reinforcement type of relationship when it comes to education and learning. I know in my classroom, students tell me, our cheeks are hurting because we laugh so much in your classroom. And my take on this is, no, I'm still passing some, I still want your thinking to connect and advance, but I want to do it in a way that you're going to be enjoying coming to class and you're going to want to come to class. So, I have colleagues who ask me, well, how come you get all your students the last day of class? You give a quiz, a surprise quiz. No, this is just how I conduct class. So, and that's part of my thought process over the last 20 years as to what I think education should look like.
Yeah, it's a very inspiring answer, Jordan. And I want to be respectful of your time. Ask you one question, if you will, indulge me. Where can I find the best chocolate in Montreal? Be it online, if I have to have it shipped.
So that question, of course, is born of my previous, life as a chocolate researcher and having done a PhD on the quote-unquote chocolate. So I've got a couple of favorite chocolate makers. And it depends, of course, what good chocolate is for you. And my typical answer for that is, for you, it's a Kit Kat, then have a Kit Kat, but really enjoy it. Like, don't scarf it down. Just take time to savor it. But if it's something else in Kit Kat, I got a couple of tips. Chloe on Duluth Avenue, East, of course, close to Parc La Fontaine. Chloe is just a fireball of energy. She loves to try, to play off some new flavors and whatnot. There's at Yule Design, up, north, they carry a brand of chocolate that's called Cantu, Qantu. Now, these are more chocolate bars as opposed to the kind of confections that you'll find at Chloe. And Cantu is young people from Peru, and they're using these sort of rare indigenous beans from Peru, and they're making this chocolate that just hits you with these wonderful ripe berry notes and exotic fruit type of taste that's just incredible. It's, of course, a high-end super premium chocolate, but is well worth to enjoy such a nice experience.
Yeah,
so two options there for you.
Yeah, I got some shopping this weekend. Jordan, thank you. One last question. Where can people find out more about your courses or about what you're doing?
Definitely just on Google, Jordan Lebel. I'll come up for sure, or else on concordia.ca, and then run a quick search for Jordan, Jordan Lebel. It's an easy one. And for sure they'll land on me or stuff I do.
Thank you so much, Jordan.
You're welcome. This was fun.
Thank you for listening to the Point of No Return podcast. Never miss an episode by clicking on the subscribe button on iTunes or Google Play.